He never heard a word of German ever until she was a teenager. I think she was like 17. They went on a trip to Germany for the first time. You know how this is going to turn out.
Hi parents, welcome to AskTetsu, where we talk about raising global kids by raising them to be multilingual, multicultural, and multi-talented. Now, one of the questions that I get asked a lot by parents is, what should I do if my kids refuse to speak the language we want them to speak? Now, I had already provided my thoughts on this question in this video right over here. But today, I want to let someone else give you his thoughts on this very difficult question. Enter Professor Stephen Krashen of the University of Southern California. If you've never heard of him, it's okay. Not everyone is familiar with the academic world of linguistics. However, if I tell you that he is the most cited applied linguist in the world, that should at least give you some idea of the level of authority that he is. He packs auditorium full of linguists eager to hear him talk. Just like, Michael Jackson packs arenas full of fans wanting to hear his music. Krashen's input hypothesis has forever changed how linguists think about language acquisition, just like Michael Jackson's moonwalk has forever changed how dancers approach their choreographies. Okay, so enough with the Michael Jackson analogies. So I met Professor Krashen for the first time at the Montreal Langfest. Now this is a language conference that I used to organize, and he gave a talk there to all the language lovers. So since then, I've had the opportunity to collaborate with him on other occasions. And earlier this year, I had a chance to sit down with him on a Zoom call. Here's Stephen Krashen on the question, what should I do if my child refuses to speak the target language?
I think the refusal to learn a language is really a refusal to talk, a refusal to answer in the language. My theoretical position, and I think it's so far reasonably correct, the language acquisition device never shuts off.
Okay.
We can acquire a language all the time at any age when the input is really interesting. So interesting, you don't even know you're not even thinking it's another language. It's compelling. That's what happens. I'll give you a story. This is Werner Leopold, one of the great pioneers. He tells this story. He always spoke German to his daughters. First daughter, no problem. They grew up in Germany. The second daughter, they were in Santa Monica. And he always spoke German to her. She answered in English. And they had a terrific father-daughter relationship. They did things together. Everything was wonderful. He never heard a word of German ever until she was a teenager. I think she was like 17. They went on a trip to Germany for the first time. You know how this is going to turn out. They went to a party. She met a young man. He was amazed to hear this beautiful German coming out of her mouth. We can acquire language at any age. We're not always willing to speak it. I think evidence for this is I think we have perfect accents. We just don't use them because we think we sound silly. It's not us. Again, I'll give you another example. This story goes back to my days when I was in Ethiopia as a Peace Corps volunteer in the 1950s, if you can imagine that. I'm a lot older than I look, okay? Anyway, I'm 80 now, but people think I'm 78 or 79, so I look anyway, I met this guy who was working for the British Council. And he told me the story that when he was in high school, secondary school in UK, in London, he took French and he hated it. He hated the teachers, he hated the language, he hated everything about it. The final examination was oral, which is torture for a teenage boy. He had to stand in front of a panel and speak French, and he decided to humiliate them and display his contempt for the French culture. And he dressed what he thought was French. He had a beret and a fake glass of wine, and he thought he would exaggerate the French accent. He'd say, "Ah, c'est très bien être ici avec vous, mes amis. Comment ça va aujourd'hui, hein?" And they said, You're terrific. This is great. How come you didn't talk like that during the year? We don't use
Oh.
our accents, our best language, because accent is a marker of your social group.
Mhm.
It's what you're a member of. So we're better than we think we are. So at an old age, we're more self-conscious. We don't feel like a member of the group, but it's there. The competence is there. My recommendation: keep talking. Don't worry what the kids say.
Mhm.
And when it's an interesting conversation, it will be there. Don't worry. It
All
never
right.
goes away. We can acquire. I'm like 80 years old now. Oh, Steve Kaufman, mutual friend of ours, okay,
Yes.
whom I greatly admire. Steve knows, about 17 languages. He says he has acquired six of them after age 72. Isn't that encouraging? And he's really
In-
good. I've
incredible.
seen him in action. Okay.
Absolutely.
So, no problem.
So, how did you like Professor Krashen's answers? Personally, I'm kind of glad to know that what I had been telling parents all these years aligns perfectly with what the world's top language expert like Professor Krashen says. Now, I'm just a hell of a lot less skilled at telling stories like Krashen, though. But the message is still there are many ways you can encourage your kids to speak a given language. But in the end, there is simply no way you can force a child to speak any language. And if everything else fails, there's always one thing that is still under your control, and that is to keep speaking the language to your kids. And even if they respond in English or whatever community language that is in your area. Yeah. Your kids will continue to still, develop as receptive bilingual in that language, which means he or she can actually understand the language really well, but cannot or will not speak the language. And to quote Dr. Krashen, the language acquisition device never shuts down. So who knows? Perhaps one day something will trigger their desire to speak the language, and you just might be amazed at how much they can actually speak. Just like the example of the teenage girl Professor Krashen mentioned. Anyways, I always learn a lot from Stephen Krashen, as he's got an amazing way of telling stories to make his messages stick so well. And speaking of things I've learned from Krashen, now check out that video in that corner where I talk about what I learned from Krashen regarding letting kids watch TV as a source of foreign language input. And right below me here is another video that YouTube thinks you might be interested in. And I'll see you in the next video.